Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. Whoever attacked Hezbollah this week not only executed the most extensive and precise military strike in history, but also did something that could potentially shift the balance of power in the Middle East. For 11 months, Hezbollah has relentlessly launched rockets and explosive drones into Israel, and for the most part, this country has shown restraint. Rather than unleashing the full might of the IDF, the Netanyahu government evacuated more than 50,000 citizens from their homes, effectively turning parts of the north into ghost towns. Did Israel receive any credit from the international community for this? Of course not. We all know that instead of supporting Israel, certain governments and media around the world spun narratives blaming us. According to this distorted version of reality, Hezbollah was merely attacking due to its solidarity with the Palestinians and Hamas in Gaza, and due to concern over the rising death toll there. This narrative claimed that if Israel only stopped its war, Hezbollah would also cease its attack. And as absurd as this was, Israel, for the most part, tried to play along to avoid a wider regional war. It allowed a terrorist group to attack its sovereign territory with impunity and responded only in a way to contain the situation and prevent it from spiraling into a regional war. Possibly, again, if this was Israel this week, up until this week. And there appears to be two options for how the series of pagers and handheld radio explosions fit into a wider Israeli strategy. First is the possibility that this is actually part of a larger preemptive strike against Hezbollah. We do not know, but if so, it would be quite brilliant. The people who were in possession of these devices were frontline Hezbollah operatives, some mid-level, some senior. If you're about to launch a larger offensive against an enemy, it would make a lot of sense to take out their communication system, and while at the same time injuring thousands of their operatives. But even if this isn't part of a wider offensive, there's still a significant value in such an attack. As the past year has shown, Hezbollah has had no problem attacking northern Israel, but it held back from escalating the conflict. In other words, it wanted to show solidarity with Hamas and engage Israel in a war of attrition in the north, but it wanted to avoid a larger conflict. Launching this attack now against Hezbollah's communications devices exposes significant and deep vulnerabilities within the Iranian-backed terrorist group. It's an intelligence penetration of the greatest kind, and it shows how the organization is weak and susceptible. If their smartphones can be hacked, and if their old school pagers can be booby-trapped, what communication system can they trust? The answer is probably none. And this can have a destabilizing effect on Hezbollah. So while the attack against these pagers and handheld comms devices won't stop Hezbollah from firing rockets into northern Israel, it does have the potential to make it realize a wider war not in their interest. This could boost deterrence. And if this is what Israel or whoever is responsible for this attack can do today, Hezbollah has to fear what that same adversary can potentially do tomorrow. So we're going to dive into this a bit deeper today. I'm joined by two of my JPPI colleagues, the Institute's Director General, Dr. Shuki Friedman, and Senior Fellow Shmuel Rosner. We talk about the significance of this attack, what does it mean for the continued standoff in the north, and how does the news about the potential dismissal of Defense Minister Yoav Gallant fit into it all? Here we go. Shuki and Shmuel, thanks so much for joining me. And, as I opened with, obviously lots to talk about, never a dull moment in this part of the world, for better or for worse. But Shmuel, beyond the potential options of what might happen, and we really don't know, is this the beginning of something bigger? Is this just meant to boost deterrence? But there have been some other reports of why this was done now, if this was in fact done by Israel. What can you tell us from what you've seen, read, heard?
Well, there are basic three options. One is to start a war, because Israel wanted to start a war with a bang, as a prelude to a larger attack. That's one option. Option number two is to send a very strong signal to Hezbollah that now is the time for negotiation and diplomatic settlement of the situation, or else we might continue to do such things. And the third option is, that Israel had something ready to launch, and for some operational reasons, because someone was getting to closer to exposing the device, or because someone was getting closer to understand that Israel has such device or such operation ready to launch. Israel had no choice but either to use it now or lose its ability to use it forever. So again, war or signal or necessity because of operational reasons.
I mean, from what we've all been reading, really that this is the stuff of like a Hollywood film, right? Israel, according to this one report in the New York Times, sets up a firm in Hungary. That firm in Hungary purchases old school pagers. I used to have as a young reporter back in the early 2000s. I'm sure you had one at one point too, Shmuel. We all reporters had
More than one.
more.
I
Yeah,
started with the one that was speaking, the voice beeper, then moved to the beeper that in which you get written reports,
right.
written messages, and then moved on
As a
to
young
the
police reporter, like 2002, 3, I used to get the messages and then became, from the military. But no one uses a pager, but Hezbollah did this because they feared that Israel could hack into obviously smartphones. We all know of that possibility. And really, to set up a fake straw company, to buy the devices, to mix the battery with some sort of explosives, to get that out there without them, no sniffer or metal detector or X-ray machine picking up on this, and then to be distributed and with the press of a button. I mean, this is like, I don't think Hollywood films come up with things of this scale. But Shuki, I want to ask you just again in this granular detail, because you of your legal background here is, I mean, I've been hearing stuff and just reading of the legality of booby trapping what should be like a civilian communications device. And I'm curious, I mean, a very kind of narrow part of this story, but one that nevertheless is interesting. I mean, what can you tell us about that?
First of all, surprisingly, or not surprisingly, found that yesterday, Borrell and others actually accused Israel on acting against Lebanon or against Hezbollah in Lebanon, because we, in one, describe it, bottom explode thousands of activists of Hezbollah and war of Hezbollah. Now, it's amazing because it was the most targeted attacks Israel could do against Hezbollah. We knew, presumably, and if Israel have done it or others have done it, that Hezbollah will get these devices, both the pagers and the communication radio, and whoever done it targeted the attack against Hezbollah individuals. So it's not booby trap, it's targeted. The casualties were very limited, and almost non-civilians have been hurt in this attack. So first of all, we are in a war in Hezbollah, it's clear. Secondly, the target here was clearly activists and warriors of Hezbollah. And thirdly, the amount of explosives that been in these devices was so small that it rarely endangered anyone around. So definitely it was legal. It's not booby trap because these are devices that aimed to get to Hezbollah hands. And if you take in consideration the other options of attacking them, it's much more proportional than any other means of attack against these people.
No, 100%. But by the way, I mean, it's not only Joseph Borrell from the European Union or European Council, it's also AOC, right? Member of Congress from New York, who tweeted,
not surprisingly,
who tweeted yesterday that, and I'll just read out part of it: Israel's pager attack in Lebanon detonated thousands of handheld devices, etc., killing innocent civilians. Right? This attack clearly and unequivocally violates international humanitarian law. So, even when Israel is as accurate and precise, I mean, I don't think there's ever been, like you said, Shuki, such a precise, accurate strike that targets. And of course, I mean, if you're a bad guy and you're leaving your beeper on the kitchen table, and it blows up while a kid is standing by. That's terrible, and the child, is caught in the crossfire. But these are Hezbollah operatives. I mean, the fact that a member of Congress in the United States and somebody who's supposed to be the foreign minister of the European Union can call for things like this is just absurd in of itself. But I want to ask you, Shmuel, about the wider picture, because if we set aside for a moment that this might have been exposed, okay, but still, even if it was going to be exposed, let's even go with that option. Just because there's a clock that's ticking doesn't mean you do something if it doesn't fit in with it should, at least, I would think, fit in with the wider strategy here, which I don't know if we have a wider strategy, because for 11 months, we basically let Hezbollah pound us in the north. We have 50,000 people who have been evacuated from their homes. They just in the last 2 weeks, I saw how they have launched 30 attacks against some unevacuated towns. So even growing the scope and scale of their attacks in the north, not just to the places that have been evacuated. I mean, how would this fit into the wider objective for Israel, if you can identify even one in the north?
Well, the objective is quite clear. The objective is to get to a reasonable settlement that pushes Hezbollah operatives away from the Israeli border and gives the residents of Israel's north confidence that they can return to their homes without the fear of being harmed by rockets, or worse, being harmed in a Hamas-like attack later, next year or the year after. So that's the objective. How do you get to such objective? That's more difficult. You can do it either by convincing Hezbollah that they have no choice but to compromise, or by forcing them into compromise, which means more war. Clearly, it's not a feasible option for Israel to keep the situation as it is today for a prolonged period of time. No country would agree to self-evacuate a quarter or a third of its territory because of an external threat. So the objective is clear. Whether the latest attack fits with an exact strategy, I don't know, but I do know that sometimes when opportunity presents itself, leaders must show some flexibility. And if they were shown that, they have this great device which they can use or lose, and they can use it now, which might put us on a path to achieving our objective, then they'll just use it. It's not as if you expect a leader. We are not in a peaceful situation when you say, well, I'm going to lose the device, but there's no reason for me to start a war. We are at war already. So clearly using, deciding to launch the attack, to push the button, puts us on a path that is a risky path. Then again, we were on a risky path to begin with. So maybe the war will be now rather than 2 months down the road or 3 months down the road. We're already there. This quite amazing, sophisticated attack was ready to launch. I don't think many Israeli or leaders of other countries in such situation would say, well, we aren't sure about the legality of the device, or we aren't certain about the exact strategy or the plan that we had 2 weeks ago. If you have it, you use it.
Shuki, one of the things though that we have seen in at least the last 11 months, particularly when it comes to the Gaza Strip, which, let's not forget, still is an active war. Even though last week the IDF did announce that it completed the operation in Rafah in the south, it broke the back of that brigade, and it feels that it has pretty much achieved its goals and aims so far, minus, and this is a big minus, the return of the 101 hostages who still remain there. But the problem that we saw in the South, I feel, is still very evident, which is what is the exit strategy? How does this war end in the South? And as we potentially now stand on the precipice of a war in the North, would it not be the responsible thing to do for Israel to already have in place today, or at least not necessarily sharing with us, but in its mind in the government, a plan of how would it want this work? Because we're not going to destroy Hezbollah, right? Just like we haven't destroyed Hamas in 11 months, we're not going to destroy Hezbollah unless we plan to reoccupy all of Lebanon indefinitely, which I hope won't happen, but you never know. This government has not exactly excelled in strategic long-term thinking for a variety of reasons. I would say one is because it's made up of far-right extremists, and we have a prime minister who occasionally, more than once, prioritizes his personal political interests above those of the nation. Feel free to disagree. But do you think that there is, before they do something like this, they even have thought out what the next steps are?
First of all, it was mentioning that about a week ago, a few days ago, the cabinet added formally to the targets of the war the return of the settlers or
The residents, yeah.
residents of the northern border to the border, and actually now it put another objective of the next step you just described, because before that, the at least official statement was that up until we finish up with the southern part of Israel and Hamas, we can't put it officially on our target. So now it's on there, and as Shmuel mentioned, this is the direction we are going there. Now, I'm sure that the IDF and the government have discussed what might be the scenario for the war or the operation that will execute in the next step in Lebanon. I'm not sure that pager operation was part of it or initiated. That yet to be seen. Let's see in few coming days, but it's going down the road toward escalation in the northern part of Israel, because either the negotiation by the US mediator will succeed, or we have to go to war and then to mediate. But basically, the target of what we want to get there is clear, and therefore, I'm sure that the IDF have already plans in place how to operate. The army at least know to build its plans and basically doesn't wait for this part of the war or the war at all. I mean, everybody for years knows that Hezbollah is a threat. Everybody for years knows that one day we will clash with them to be war in the northern border of Lebanon, and therefore there are plans, I assume, on the table. How would the cabinet execute them? To what extent it will go in Lebanon by ground force or air attacks? I don't know. But basically, I assume that when it happens, the IDF and the cabinet should put on their agenda the question of how to operate, but more important, what is the end game of this operation? Because as we all know, an operation of itself would not be satisfied.
Right. Shmuel, I'm curious, you're closely following, as we know, the elections in the United States. And we saw Secretary of State Blinken was actually on his way, I think, to Cairo for part of these efforts that the U.S. has been making to reach a ceasefire in Gaza on when the second round of explosions took place with the handheld devices in Lebanon. I can imagine that might have been a bit embarrassing for the Biden administration. And I'm curious if at all you think that the November 5th election is playing any role here in Israel's thinking and planning.
It's a good question. I think that the Israeli leadership is aware of the fact that some change of guards is about to happen, although it will take time. It's a new president will be inaugurated only in January, so there is still a lot of time until then. an eruption of a larger war in the Middle East is not quite good for the sitting administration. This is what they've been trying to avoid for the last year, even more than a year. If they fail, if the larger war begins in Lebanon, they'll probably put some blame on Israel and some on Hezbollah, but they should also look in the mirror. You know, they've been trying to settle things for quite some time, sending Amos Hochstein back and forth to Beirut and Jerusalem and other places. And ultimately, they did not put enough pressure on the parties, both on Israel and on Hezbollah, to settle this matter diplomatically. If this happens, it will give some fodder to the allegations made by candidate Donald Trump, former President Trump, that had it been him, the Middle East would not be so stormy. It would have been much quieter. You know, this is the type of argument with which you cannot really agree or disagree. It's a hypothesis. It's an interesting hypothesis, but we don't know if it's true or not. The Biden administration still has time to make sure that the larger war does not happen. But I think that the key for it is to put more pressure on the Lebanese side. Again, Israel, like all other countries in the world, cannot tolerate a situation in which a whole region of the country is evacuated, abandoned, bombed on a daily basis, and threatened by operatives that sit on the other side of the fence. So this will either be resolved by diplomacy or by force. Israel doesn't have many diplomatic means with which to resolve the situation. So if it's up to Israel, then it will have to resort to war, ultimately. If someone wants this thing to end with a diplomatic effort, now is the time to act, because clearly what happened in the last couple of days had put us on a path that is quickly deteriorating and will quickly bring us much closer to a war between Israel and Hezbollah.
So Shuki, I mean,
I would like just to
yeah.
add to what Shmuel said.
Well, but let me just sharpen the question for you, Shuki, because you just got back from the United States. You were in Washington. You had some meetings there. You spoke with a bunch of people, also in government, but also policy thinkers. I mean, like, what's your impression also just on this topic?
So basically, I completely agree that the administration failed both in the south and in the north. I mean, it didn't manage to bring any compromise and not a deal with the hostages with Hamas, and it could put much more pressure on Egypt, on Qatar, to push Hamas, and failed to do it. And the same with Lebanon and Iran. But there is another perspective to this question, which is the Israeli perspective and the administration-Israel relations, because it's true that since the administration failed and Hochstein didn't brought any deal to the table, very serious deal to the table, it couldn't push Hezbollah or leverage Hezbollah to negotiate or to compromise, it pushed Israel to war. But deciding to go to the war with Hezbollah today needs also the backing of the administration, both from political perspective and we need the backing of diplomacy and in the UN, and basically also in supplies, and therefore a decision of going to the war should be in some this or another coordinated with the United States. And secondly, which is not less important, the end game is also based on the ability of the administration, again, to negotiate with Hezbollah under the pressure of Israel. So basically, it's a decision on Israel, and we're sovereign to take the decision to go to the war. We have all the justification in the world since we've been attacked for 11 months by Hezbollah, but it wouldn't be wise to do it without any coordination with the administration. And basically, on both sides, here in DC, everybody understands that by the time the escalation is closer and closer, we're getting closer to war. But when and how we do it, it's a matter of sort of a coordination, if not a sensitivity of Israel to the interest of the administration. And we all have to remember that I think the main goal of the administration, the Biden administration, is to pass the November election quietly and then to go forward.
So Shmuel, but before we wrap up, I do, it's hard to ignore the politics of everything that's going on. And this week was specifically or particularly interesting when in just a few days ago, it seemed that Netanyahu was about to dismiss the defense minister, Yoav Gallant, and replace him with Gideon Sa'ar. And just to our listeners who might not be as familiar with Gideon Sa'ar used to be one of the top members of Likud for a number of years, decided to depart the party a few years ago, took a leave of absence from Likud, came back, tried to run against Netanyahu, did not succeed, of course, then broke off, established his own party, originally called New Hope, then left. That party didn't work out so well, joined Benjamin Gantz's party, then that didn't work out. Now he's on his own once again. He's got, 3 or 4 members of Knesset.
Our viewers already have a headache. I suggest you stop here.
I mean, I'm probably missing something in that whole roller coaster of politics. But now he's got 4 seats that belong to him in the Knesset. Joining Netanyahu would give Netanyahu a nice boost within his coalition. But the price that he's asking for is to become the defense minister. And that would require Netanyahu to get rid of Yoav Gallant. And I just want to add one other element to that, right? Because if it's not complicated enough, why would Netanyahu want to get rid of Gallant? Well, Netanyahu always wants to get rid of anyone who is a potential threat, but also, and probably more important at the moment, Gallant has said he would not play ball with the ultra-Orthodox in the draft law that they are demanding. And if they don't get the draft law that they want, there's no state budget. There's no state budget. We go to an election, and Netanyahu, of course, doesn't want that. So he needs a defense minister who would be more sympathetic to his personal political needs here. And that could potentially be Gideon Sa'ar. So that comes out a couple days ago. Was that real, or was that just a ploy to weaken Gideon Sa'ar and make Gallant more of a soldier for Netanyahu, knowing that he might be dismissed? And then all of this stuff that's happening in the middle was all meant to make all that kind of stuff look like it's not that important. I don't know. I'm just trying to figure it out.
Well, what you call interesting, I call bizarre. This was one of the most bizarre situation one can face and observe at war. The defense minister was about to be fired, and then hours later, Israel launches, well, if it's Israel, someone launches this attack in Lebanon, and everything shifts on a dime. Everything changes on a dime. Did Netanyahu really mean to fire Defense Minister Gallant? It seems as if he did intend to do such thing. Many of the people around him say that he still wants to do it, but clearly understands that now is not the exact time. On the other hand, one could also say that if he doesn't do it, he still gained from the whole situation because, well, as you said, Gideon Sa'ar was weakened and was presented, for Gideon Sa'ar will never get any leverage from any opposition supporter, from any opposition party. He lost his credibility with the center left forever. So he was weakened. And on the other hand, maybe Gallant, Gallant doesn't want to lose his position as defense minister. So maybe he did realize that this is becoming serious, and now he'll find some more flexibility when the law of the draft becomes an issue again. Then again, you said interesting, I say bizarre. What we see here are 2 politicians, and I mean Netanyahu and Sa'ar, looking to better their political situation when things are in complete flux in Israel, when we are at war at least 2 fronts, when there are grave issues on the table. And, I don't think this will boost the credibility and the level of faith that Israelis have in the leadership when they think about, the prime minister's actions just hours before an attack of such magnitude is launched in Lebanon.
I call this the two-step dance that Israel has been doing since the beginning of this war. We're fighting wars, I want to say of existential importance, but wars of superb strategic importance. And we take one step forward with fighting the war, and the second step is the politics. It's just always there, and it's like they go together. Shuki, just to wrap us up, though, I do want to ask you one question. You and I were both at a conference last week where Gideon Sa'ar also appeared. Now, what makes Gideon Sa'ar interesting is that he is really one of the few people in Israeli politics, and he's been a member of Security Cabinet, and he was a cabinet secretary. The guy does have serious governmental credentials, who has long called for preemptive action against Hezbollah. It's not new. He's been doing this for years now. Now, he has explained that when he was calling for it back in 2017, 2018, it was before they got what's known as PGMs, precision guided munitions, and that's why he said we should attack at that time. So I don't know exactly where he stands right now, but from your just impression, if he were to become defense minister, and I don't know how everything's going to play out anyhow over the next couple of days, but would you expect a significant policy shift if he's defense minister?
We all remember Avigdor Lieberman calling to eliminate Hamas in 48 hours and promising to the people of Israel, the state of Israel, that if he be nominated to the Ministry of Defense, in 48 hours he will eliminate all Hamas leaders and all Hamas at all. Nothing of that happened, of course, when he became Minister of Defense. So I'm barely seeing that something dramatic will change in the Israeli policy if tomorrow morning Gideon Sa'ar replaced Gant in the position of Minister of Defense. There are strategic questions and consideration we've just mentioned before, and other that pushing these people in this position, Minister of Defense, Prime Minister, to decide the strategies. And therefore, it's different when you are in opposition and can put statements on the stage in DC, and when you are in the 15th floor of the Kiryat building, when you have to take the actual decisions and decide the strategies and going to a war or prevent of it. And therefore, maybe we'll see some differences or here and there different tones, but I barely think that he can change the course of things if he becomes tomorrow morning Minister of Defense.
Okay, well, lots to think about as we go into the weekend here, and no one really knows where this is all going. But I guess why would this weekend be much different than the last 50 or so since October 7th? So Shuki, Shmuel, thank you so much for joining us. To our listeners and to our viewers, thank you so much also for being with us. You can find us every Monday and Thursday on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. Please give us a 5-star rating if you do and would like to. And in the meantime, have a Shabbat Shalom, a great weekend, and we hope for some quiet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Quiet weekend.
Thank you for joining this week's episode. You can find us always on Apple and Spotify. In the meantime, have a Shabbat Shalom, a good weekend. And as always, we hope things will stay quiet. Thank you for being